Thank you for joining us today for this conversation. Our subject for today, justice at the border. And we're so excited for you to join us for this important conversation. We all know that this is such a relevant conversation that is being had in our churches, in our communities, in our country. And what we want to do is open spaces so that these conversations can be had in a gracious but also courageous way. Our first guest is Sergio Gonzalez. He is a Daca recipient and a recent graduate. He was born in Mexico and is Prescott local at heart. He currently works at Yavapai College in admissions, helping Latinos in the enrollment process to attend the school. Then we have Francine Gutierrez, who is a Daca recipient. She's from Chihuahua, Mexico, and came to the U.S. at 11 months old. She is a Prescott College graduate, and she's currently working on her master's degree in critical psychology. She's an advocate and working at stepping stone agencies, domestic violence shelter. She's lived in Yavapai County most of her life, and Prescott is her home. Also have Professor Ernesto Todd Mireles, who is a full faculty member at the Cultural and Regional Studies undergraduate program and the Social Justice Community Organizing Master's program. He's also the coordinator for the Franz Fanon Community Strategy Center at Prescott College. Dr. Mireles spent many years working as a professional organizer in several different fields. He says he has been trained and has trained others in union, electoral, and Chicano movement organizing. And finally, we have our guests from the Arizona Dream Act Coalition. They're visiting us from Phoenix, and we're just so thankful for them to be here. They do advocacy as well, advocacy work on the areas of immigration. And they'll be talking more about the work that they do, but we're definitely very thankful that you guys are here. So let's give them a welcome as well. I want to give an opportunity to Professor Mireles, Ernesto Mireles, to come here and just kind of have lead us in our conversation.
I know that sometimes in the area that we live in, this can be a hard conversation to have with people, but I think it's an important one to have because, you know, as we look into the future, into the 21st century, what we understand, if we're reading the situation correctly, is massive migration of the world's population on a scale that has never been seen before because of environmental and climate disaster. I mean, there are whole countries, actually one of them, Bangladesh, which is one of the most densely populated countries in the world, is almost completely below sea level. And so Bangladesh will disappear from the map by the end of the 21st century, more than likely. And so millions and millions of people are on the move. And, you know, we have to kind of think about that. I think that for Mexicanos, for Latinos, some other Latinos, mostly Mexicanos, people from Central and America in particular, that the immigration issue is a little bit different in that, well, and we'll talk about it. That's why I titled this presentation, The Border Crossed Us. It's a brief conversation about immigration. And I am saying immigration because part of what I would posit out to you all is that you can't really immigrate to a place that you're from. And I know that sounds like, you know, like what's this guy talking about? But we'll see in a second. And we're just going to run through some slides real quick. As soon as I figure out how to use this thing. Okay, there we go. A part of this whole conversation centers around our conception of history, right? How do we see history? And so here in the United States, we see history flows from the east to the west, right? That's how history goes. But history in this continent also goes from the south to the north. Right? And so one of the things that we understand is that before Europeans came to the Americas, there weren't any Europeans here, right? There were people here, but there weren't any Europeans here. And those people that were here, they controlled the land. They controlled the resources. They controlled the industry. They built cities. They had universities. Some of them had forms of writing, right? They had entire civilizations that existed outside of the sphere of European influence. Now, the reason that I'm saying this to you is this, is that when Europeans came, there was a brief moment. So if you look up, well, you're going to look up here, I'm looking over there. But if you look up at the screen, right, you see it says you have indigenous history, it's pre-conquest history, okay? Then there's this moment of contact and this moment of conquest, which is actually quite a long moment of conquest. But at that point, what happens is that pre-Columbian history ends, right? For those of us who are descendants of indigenous people here in the Americas, our history ended. Our history as national, as a nationalized group of people, right? As people with national identities, it ended at that moment. And from that moment forward, what we are living in is the settlers' history, right? The people who came. This is the history that we're living in now is their history. And so as we move through this is part of the understanding of the debate around when people start talking about immigration, right? Because, and we see it all the time. You know, those young men after Donald Trump was elected, right? As they marched down the street with their torches, you will not replace us, you know, blood and soil. Who is it that they were referring to? Who is it that they think is going to replace them? I mean, it's a question, right? And so as we go through it, you know, the graphic points out a couple of other things, talks about, you know, what's called a national liberation movement and then a return to history. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, but if anybody wants to talk about it, I'd be happy to do that. On February 2nd, 1848, the war between the United States and Mexico officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right? That treaty, which is still in effect to this day, but is surprisingly unremarked about everywhere that you go, did a couple of things. One of the things it did was it said that all Mexican nationals who elected to stay after the border was moved automatically became U.S. citizens. Everybody that decided to stay automatically became a U.S. citizen. There were approximately 115,000 people became citizens at that time. Now, what's interesting, and I think is also important about this discussion, is that since that point, since that moment, at no point in history, in the history of this country, have so-called undocumented people outnumbered citizens, ever, right? But when we think about the way the narrative plays out in the media, right, we're all undocumented. And this goes back again to some stuff that we're going to talk about here in a second. The treaty also guaranteed land rights, saying that whoever owned land before the United States took possession, right, that their deeds and all of that would be respected. We can see that that hasn't happened. And it also, interestingly, guarantees language rights, that people of Mexican descent have the right to speak Spanish in the United States. So this is really interesting because all of this is kind of happening at the same time. Now, one of the things that's really important to remember is that this is right before the Civil War, right? So there's also a huge debate happening in the United States about slavery and about states' rights and, you know, all of that. This particular gentleman is very interesting. I think he is. I think he was a terrible person, but I think he's really interesting. He was a senator, he was Secretary of Defense, he was all sorts of things. But there was a debate, and you'll see that this debate took place on January 4th, 1848, And the treaty was signed on February 2nd, 1848. So right before this treaty is signed, there's this debate in the US Congress about whether or not they shouldn't just march all the way to Mexico City and take the whole thing over, right? That was the debate. Should we annex this entire country and then bring it into the Union, right, into the Union? And so Calhoun, and you can read it up there. We'll leave it up for a second. But the part that I think is really interesting about his speech is that he says, nor have we ever incorporated into the Union any but the Caucasian race. To incorporate Mexico would be the first departure of the kind, for more than half of its population are pure Indians. And by far the largest portion, residual mixed blood. I protest against the incorporation of such a people. Ours is the government of the white man. Now, you know, somebody may say, oh, well, it's 2021. But in 2016, they were saying almost exactly the same thing, right? So the question, as we draw ourselves along historically, right, the question that we really have to ask ourselves is, what is this fuss about immigration, right? Because as we look at it, what Calhoun is saying is, we can't bring these guys in. We just got rid of the other Indians. Why would we bring all of these Indians in, right? And it, you know, he says we didn't hold them in thrall or, you know, make them slaves or, you know, but we drove them back into the forest, right? We got rid of them. We cleared the land. This is our land. We took it. It's ours. And that's the message that's coming through. And it's not the message that's coming through from Billy Bob or Jimmy Ray down the corner, right? This guy is a United States Senator who was a very prominent and very important person. It came from the President of the United States just a few years ago. And I mean, whether we like Donald Trump or not, he was still President of the United States. And he said it. And a lot of people got onto the street behind it. So when we think about this idea, like what's going on, right? What we're talking about is a certain type of violence. But what we're talking about is a legal violence. Legally, the state reserves for itself a number of things. One of them, the very top thing being the taking of life, right? Which is why we just can't go out and exact justice, killings, or revenge, right? Because the state reserves for itself the right to take life, the right to take life. So when we think about what that means in terms of immigration, and then we look at the border, right, and we see the, you know, Haitian immigrants being beaten back across the river with whips, you know, men driving them across with, you know, on horseback, or any of the number of riots or massacres that have happened on the US-Mexico border within the last 5 years, you know, with the deprivation of liberty. So when we say the taking of life, well, I mean, it could literally mean taking somebody's life, but incarcerating people, incarcerating children, that is also a violence that is enacted against their life because they can't leave that place, right? Once they're there, they're there. And there's no way to get out. And so what this philosopher, his name is Walter Benjamin, and Benjamin grew up in Germany in the early part of the 20th century. And by the time the Nazis came to power, he was already a fairly old man. He was also Jewish. And he died in France fleeing the Nazis. And Benjamin writes in this piece, The Critique of Violence, he says, one might perhaps consider the surprising possibility that the law's interest in a monopoly of violence vis-a-vis individuals is explained not by the intention of preserving legal ends, but rather by the intention of preserving the law itself. The law acts on behalf of the state. The law acts to uphold the state. That's what the law does, right? If something moves counter to the state, then the law is against it. Now think about that. Now that's not me saying it. That's this gentleman in 1921, right? This German Jewish philosopher saying in 1921 that the state enacts law on its own behalf to preserve itself. Now, I think that that's interesting. I think it's particularly interesting in terms of the conversation, the discussion that we're having today about immigration, right? Because if it's illegal to immigrate, then the state must see that as a way of preserving itself. Calhoun saw it. He knew what was going on. Calhoun would not be in favor of immigration today, right? He would say, why are we letting these Indians into this country? That is where he would go with it. So when we think about this idea of legal violence, I mean, we have to understand, right? It's the same thing. We wonder why police officers don't go to jail for murdering black men. It has to be, I would submit to you, that taking of that life somehow advances the opportunities of the state. Because if it didn't, then they would be put in jail. We know people who are put in jail all the time for all kinds of things, right? But not that. There's a debate about that, right? So what are we debating? Are we debating the police officers, or are we debating the role of the state in carrying out these policies and what it is that it means? So I'll just leave you with these thoughts right now. I think one of the things that we can say with some certainty is that Mexicans, Central Americans, particularly Central Americans, are indigenous people, right? And what that means is that we've been here long enough, 10, 20,000, 30,000 years. I mean, how far back do you have to go before you didn't immigrate here, right? That's the question. That's why that's important, right? 62, as of, I feel like there's a slide missing. There is a slide missing. No, I jumped over it. Sorry. I think this is important. 115,000 in 1848. In 1930, the first U.S. census that allowed somebody to record themselves as Mexican was taken. There were 2 million people that recorded themselves as Mexican in 1930. In 1970 census, there were 7 million people that identified themselves as Mexican. In the 2020 census, the Hispanic or Latino population, which includes people of different races, was 62.1 million people. All right. The 2020 census was also the first census in the history of the United States where the white population decreased. Interesting. 62 million people. So in a recent, my second point, 62 million people should be able to end the immigration crisis. They should. I mean, really, 62 million people working together in concert should be able to end this crisis. In a recent Pew Hispanic Center survey on the top issues of the Hispanic community, immigration ranked 5th after topics like education and school to prison pipeline. And that survey was taken within the Hispanic community. My personal question, as I look at this, is why has the Mexican American community sat out for most of this struggle? Because for myself, as an organizer in the Chicano community for the last 30 years, that is my analysis of it, that by and far, other Chicanos, Mexican Americans, have sat this struggle out. They have not gotten involved en masse. I'll also submit to you all that this is not a legal issue, that it is a matter of maintaining control over stolen lands. And the last part that I would throw out to you all is that we will continue to see a rise in settler violence as the white population decreases over the next several decades. That's my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Yeah, and I just want to make a quick note that we did have another person who was invited, an immigration lawyer from Tucson. And unfortunately, yesterday, I received a call saying that she wouldn't be able to make it today. But guess what also happened? I took my phone and I started calling people, and the people from the Arizona Dream Act Coalition said, we'll be there yesterday. And I'm so thankful for that, because that gives us an opportunity to also hear about the important work that they're doing to help the immigrant community. And I'm just so thankful for all of you to be here. And I want to give you an opportunity to come and to the podium and talk a little bit about the work that you do. And we'd love to hear about that.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Cruz Ramirez. I'm volunteer the Arizona Dream Coalition. My work is too in Arizona Dream Coalition. Arizona Dream Coalition es una organización sin fines de lucro.
Hello, everyone. My name is Excel, and our organization is ADAC, Arizona Dream Act Coalition. We're a nonprofit organization.
Está ubicada en Phoenix, Arizona.
It's located in Phoenix, Arizona.
En el 2010 se empezó a organizar por parte de jóvenes.
In 2010, the organization was started for the youth.
Especialmente para tener una colegiatura y también para que sus padres tuvieran una ciudadanía.
It was built for the youth to go to college and for the parents as well.
En el 2011 se formó como organización sin fines de lucro.
In 2010, it became a nonprofit organization.
Igualmente por los jóvenes, en el 2006, a base de la proposición 300.
And on 2006, proposition was the 300, and
que los jóvenes pagaran colegiatura como fuera del estado.
The proposition 300 was for the youth, so they didn't have to pay in-state tuition.
3 veces más que las personas que son ciudadanas.
For the students, the in-state students didn't have to pay the same.
Como organización tenemos consultoría de abogados.
As an organization, we have attorneys.
Visitamos centros de detención.
We visit detention centers.
Conseguimos becas para jóvenes para ir a la universidad.
We find
Scholarship.
we find scholarship for youth to go to the university.
También tenemos la registración de votantes para hacer el trabajo, salir a las calles, tocar las puertas de todas las personas que son elegibles para votar.
We also go to places, places so they could register to vote.
Para cambiar estas leyes que están contra la comunidad inmigrante.
That right now we're fighting, so we could help out the community so they could pass a pathway to citizenship.
Nuestra misión, como dije, es educar y empoderar.
Our mission is to educate and empower.
Y la visión es tener un mundo en nuestra comunidad.
Our vision is to have
de indocumentados. De indocumentados.
Documented.
Para poder tener un trabajo.
So they could have a job.
Digno. Digno.
Dignity, justice, and without fear of without fear.
Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ana. Estoy en la organización Arizona Dream Act Coalition.
Oh, hello. My name is Ana. I'm in the Arizona Dream Act Coalition.
Nuestros servicios en la organización son renovar sus permisos de DACA.
My job at the Arizona Dream Act Coalition is to help with initials and renewals.
Las personas, los personas que son que califican por DACA por primera vez, también hacemos esos servicios de someter nuevas aplicaciones por primera vez.
We also help the initial first-time people apply, and also for renewals.
Aunque ahorita por el momento está detenida esa procesación por una orden del juez de Texas.
Although right now the process for the initials is on stop due to what happened in Texas, we are still accepting applications.
Por el momento, Emigración no está aceptando nuevas aplicaciones, no está procesando nuevas aplicaciones.
Right now, the immigration is not accepting applications or processing them.
Pero aconsejamos a la comunidad a que ellos puedan enviar sus aplicaciones, aunque por el momento no estén procesándose.
But we tell our community to still fill out the applications and turn it in to the Arizona Dream Act Coalition.
Emigración no las está rechazando, simplemente las está aceptando y quedan como en un tiempo de espera en lo que se resuelve esta situación.
Immigration right now is not processing the applications. They're just keeping them there. And we are telling our communities to fill them out and turn them into us so we could keep them.
Nosotros lo que aconsejamos es que si alguien califica por primera vez, que tramite su permiso por primera vez para que ya estén dentro de migración a su paquete, para cuando haya algo nuevo, ya esté dentro su paquete.
Okay, we're telling them to process them because if right now we're fighting, or it's not determined right now, but if Texas overrules or does something, we still can have their documents on our hands, and we could later on, they're going to be the first ones to get them in.
Los nuevos aplicantes en nuestra organización hacemos un par de preguntas para ver si califican.
For you to qualify, we first ask you some questions in order to see if you qualify.
Inclusive nuestra organización, ninguno de nuestra organización son abogados.
And our Dream Act Coalition, we are not attorneys.
Pero si un caso de algún joven que quiera tramitar o alguna persona que quiera tramitar por primera vez, lo referimos si su caso ha tenido que ver con la policía o está envueltos en drogas, lo referimos con los abogados.
In case we receive a case that has to do with legal problems, we refer them to an attorney.
También se hacen ciudadanías. Las personas que quieren hacerse ciudadanos, a nuestra organización puede hacer ese trámite.
We also do citizenship.
Igual también se hacen, nuestra directora de la organización, Karina Ruiz, actualmente abrió un nuevo programa.
And currently our director, Karina Ruiz, opened a new program called Summer of Dreams.
Que se llama Advance Parole.
Yeah, Advance Parole.
Donde anteriormente estaba suspendido, pero ahora está disponible.
It was canceled due to Donald Trump stopping everything, but right now it's open.
En el 2017 ella hizo su Advance Parole, salió a la Ciudad de México.
In 2017, the director, Karina Ruiz, did her process so she could get Advance Parole, and she went to Mexico.
Y tuvo la oportunidad de ir a sepultar a su padre ahora que murió por el COVID.
And she had the chance to go and sepultate her father in Mexico that currently passed away due to COVID.
Así que ahora ella tiene su propio programa donde tiene un grupo de 20 personas que van a salir a la Ciudad de México en este invierno.
And due to her going to Mexico and joining this program, she decided to make her own program called Summer of Dreams, where she has 20 youth people involved.
en el cual ella nunca expondría a las personas a hacer algo que ella misma no ha experimentado, así que el advance parole es si la persona no tiene ningún récord criminal o no tiene ninguna orden de arresto, es totalmente seguro.
Where she created it, and she is doing this because she did it before, and she's not going to involve people to do something she hasn't done before, and she's taking them, the people that have no legal problems, no criminal background.
Actualmente está programando otro grupo para el verano, que viene siendo mayo, junio y julio.
Right now, she's creating another program because the current one she's doing right now is currently full, but she's doing another one for May, August, and June.
Si ustedes gustan visitar nuestra página en Facebook, estamos como Arizona Dream Act Coalition, donde hay más información acerca de Advance Parole para el grupo de personas que van a salir ahora en el verano.
If you'd like to know more about the program Summer of Dreams, we have a Facebook. It's called Arizona Dream Act Coalition, where you could view more details about this.
También parte de lo que hace nuestra organización, los servicios que ofrece es Sueños Migrantes.
And
Sueños Migrantes.
another program is Dreams. Dreams? Oh, Immigrant Dreams, sorry.
Para toda aquella persona que está aquí en los Estados Unidos y que tiene más de 10 años que no ha visto a sus padres, sus padres en México tienen que tener más de 62 años para que califiquen en el programa.
Okay, and Summer Dreams, Immigrant Dreams is about people that have been here in the United States that could go visit their parents in Mexico that haven't had the chance to see them in a long time, and they have to have parents have to be 62 years old.
Se me pasó comentarles que del Advance Parole hay 3 razones por las que pueden salir, que viene siendo por emergencia, por trabajo o por estudio.
She forgot another thing. It was that in order to receive advanced parole, you have to leave through emergency, educational, and a job.
Si alguien de las personas que están escuchando este mensaje tienen una emergencia con su familiar en México y quieren someter a Advance Parole, nuestra organización les puede ayudar.
If anyone that's hearing us and wants advanced parole, you could contact us at Arizona Dream Act Coalition or visit our website on Facebook or on Instagram, the ADAC.
Muchas gracias, es un placer estar con ustedes.
Thank you, it was a pleasure. Okay. Wait. I'm going to talk about one more thing that I want to add on to this is right now, I don't know if you have heard about the parliament, what's going on right now. Right now, we're trying to pass an immigration reform for millions. And in the Senate right now, there is a lady in the position that is in charge of the parliament. She is a consultant or advisor. She recently said that she doesn't agree with the decision of the budget reconciliation that was passed that included the immigration reform, but that doesn't mean it's the final decision. She just handed out an opinion, and that's not the last decision. The ones that make the decisions are the Democrats, our representatives, and the president. Right now, we're trying to bring awareness to the community, to go out and call the senators, especially right now, our Democrats, Senator Kelly and McCarthy and Sinema, that we need the votes right now. So if you ever have time right now, if you could call them and let them know to include the immigration reform, so as much immigrants could be included in the immigration. That would be awesome. Thank you.
part of the purpose of this is also to think about the future and think about what are some of the things that we can do now to create a more just, more welcoming reality for particularly our immigrant brothers and sisters. So there are resources out there, there are things that can be done. There are many ways in which we can get involved. So in many ways, this is also a call to action for many of us.
So before we get started into the discussion part, I was hoping that Sergio and Francine could take a couple minutes and talk about their story, share their story with us. Sergio, you want to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit about not only myself and my story with being an immigrant in education, but also a little bit of what makes Prescott, the greater Prescott community, stand out a little bit. So, yeah, I consider myself an immigrant, although I don't necessarily love the word immigrant. I definitely, I was born in Mexico and I immigrated here to the US. I have a view in life that movement is life and life is movement. And I believe that everyone moves, everyone has movement in life. And yeah, well, I have the label immigrant, but I believe everyone's an immigrant in a way or two. So kind of bouncing off of the presentation that Dr. Morales presented to us before, movement is life. And I believe that when, like the US border, when movement is taken away, for example, I cannot go to leave the US and go to Mexico to visit family, that's taking movement away. And I believe, in a way, if movement is life and you're taking movement away, I resonate with that is taking life. And that's what we were shown in the state violence slide. So just to also give a little background, I am a Daca recipient. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Deferred action just means I have protection to not be deported. It's a program that I apply to every 2 years. It does not have a direct line to become a US citizen. Although it is a protection, I don't have that guarantee, and I have to, every 2 years, apply for this program. However, there is the path to citizenship, and there are 3 options for that. That is 1, marriage. 2, you can join the military and gain your citizenship in a path through that, as well as the 3rd option, an employer to sponsor you. And that is what their group was mentioning. That's when you get your green card, and that's a limited permanent residence card. That is not a citizenship yet, but there's steps to go still further, and lots of money and resources that have to go into that. And resources like Arizona Dream Act Coalition, they definitely help with working within the system with attorneys and voting and stuff like that to make it easier. So that's a little bit about the background with those status. And I just also wanted to bring a leeway into Prescott and just what makes Prescott a little different. So I recently just graduated from Prescott College with a bachelor's degree, and I had a lot of opportunity where I was able to organize within the Prescott community and the Latinos here. One of the few things that I found that were a little different, as opposed to like organizing in Tucson or Flagstaff or Phoenix, is that a few things. Churches are a really great opportunity to organize in Prescott, yet sometimes it's difficult to get other Latinos that are in different churches to kind of come together. There's a little bit of hesitation that is based in fear, I believe, in Prescott that prevents people from communing together in larger groups. That is mostly based on the history of Prescott that has allowed I believe, 75 cities in the US have this law, 287G? Yeah, the law 287G. Out of 13,000 or however many cities and municipalities of police departments across the entire nation, there are 75 towns, as I believe the last time I checked, 75 cities and towns and police departments who enforce the law 287G, whom 287G works directly with ICE, ICE being the Immigration Custom Enforcement, and they have direct contact with them to streamline the deportation. So therefore, that's a little history of Prescott, why there's a lot of hesitation with large groups of Latinos coming together. Another thing in my organizing path and like history with Prescott College is that I've realized that a lot of the people who do organize are organized from within. So like the Latinos are organizing their own events. And it's a little harder when you have, for example, Yavapai College, who's my employer, when they organize events, it's harder to get people to come out as opposed to, you know, the Latino community organizing stuff for themselves. So that just gives a little bit of hesitation. It shows a little hesitation of why it is harder for there to be more pride and more a larger attendance in Latinos and more signs of the culture here in town. But yeah, I also want to, one of the things that I wanted to explore and I feel I'll touch on later in this panel is the art. I'm an artist myself, and I feel that one story that really captures the story of Prescott is with a mural that was up in Prescott here within an elementary school. The elementary school is no longer here and up anymore, but there was a story that there was a mural that was created on the side of this school, this elementary school, Miller Valley, where there was the portrait of a young boy of color whom was a student of the school, who had a lot of Latino students, little boys, little girls in this elementary school. And there was a huge debate and this huge, I don't know what to call it, but for the lack of a better word, a scandal of having this mural taken down because the boys in the mural, the portrait was too dark. His skin was not light enough for the likes of the community, and it was commissioned to become lighter skin color. And I guess that kind of gives a little leeway to Francine. It was Todd Morales said a council member for the city of Prescott was the one who made the comment and initiated this process. But that's a little bit of Prescott, and I'll give room for Francine to talk. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Francine Gutierrez, and I am originally, I don't know where he is, Efrain said, I'm from Chihuahua, Mexico. I arrived to the United States when I was 11 months old with my older brother and my parents. Prescott has been my home for as long as I can remember. It definitely, like Sergio was saying, has been difficult growing up here, being a person of color and being undocumented and a Daca recipient, just because of the lack of resources, the lack of knowledge surrounding law and you know, like the 287G and how that affected the community, the Latinx community here. And alongside with Sergio, I organized as well I've been organizing for, I think, 4+ years now in the community. And I think, like he mentioned, it's been difficult, more than we thought it was going to be, to organize the community, the Latinx community itself. And like he said, we are a very united, very tight community, but that hasn't made it easier to organize because of the resistance towards collaborating and being a part of the rest of the community that isn't the Latinx community. And so, like, events like these, prior events that we've had through Keep Prescott Together is also another organization that was built a couple of years ago, who is a branch, I guess, of Keep Tucson Together, which helped. We started off with what was legal clinics, helping out with DACA renewals, naturalization, citizenship, guidance, and all that type of stuff. Then later, towards the election year, this past year, we directed it more towards election and mobility and registration and all that stuff, and getting the Latinx community involved within politics, because it has grown. And I'm sure I don't know how long you guys have all been here for, but Prescott has been growing, and it will keep growing. So, just as the whole community grows, so does the Latinx community. So it's been, I guess we found it very important to finally start creating community. And we were talking about this other day at breakfast, how Prescott has had many resources and many organizations come by, try to organize the Latinx community, didn't see any movement, didn't see any engagement, and, just passed by. And so we've never had any permanent organization or support because of the resistance. And it's not that resistance will not be there forever, but it's definitely a work in progress, and we're working towards gaining that trust. And I see myself, it took me a couple of years to even, be able to open up about my story, let people know that I'm undocumented and that I'm a Daca recipient. This is something I never talked about in high school, which was only 4 years ago. So I just recently graduated high school, but it doesn't seem that much long ago, but it's taken me this long to be able to take pride in my culture and take pride in my legal status. And because, voice is powerful, and voice is movement, and like Sergio was saying, and life. And so it's been hard to organize, but it hasn't been impossible. So, but little things like the mural that he was talking about, and 287G, and, SB 1070 as well in the state of Arizona, little things like that is what is enough to scare the community and to show that resistance towards, empowering and growing within and empowering each other and all. But so in high school, I didn't talk about my legal status, really. No one knew that I wasn't from here. I never talked about it because people were surprised when I told them I spoke Spanish, and they didn't believe it. They're like, "You're fluent?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am," And so, my teachers didn't even know until teacher conferences where, I had to translate for my mom, basically telling her the teacher was like, "Oh, you're doing great." And it was embarrassing, I had to tell my mom, "Oh, she's saying I'm doing great." She didn't know if I'm lying or not. But so until then, they're like, "Oh, you speak Spanish," for a long time, I was never open, and it wasn't that I was scared. I wasn't taught to voice my status and take pride in my culture. And until we started organizing, I started meeting people like Sergio and other Daca recipients, and organizing the community, and seeing that people were loving and caring and passionate towards me. And so, it opened up many, many opportunities for me. And, here I am now sharing my story. And, I will continue to do that. And so the transition from high school to college has been crazy and very different. And I am a very different person who I was back then to the person I am now. And it's, I've gained this confidence, and this confidence that I feel every individual should have, regardless of, their legal status and whatnot. So, but it takes time. It takes time and patience. So through Keep Prescott Together, we will continue to have patience and dedicate our time towards continue to organize and create a powerful and empowered community, and hopefully, create other resources using those community leaders who have the power and voice within their own community, but they just don't know it yet. Yeah.
So now that we've had a chance to hear from everyone, I know there's some questions. Maybe we could take a couple of questions.
My name is Maria Elena Dunn, and I, among other things, I was born in Cuba, so I'm an immigrant too, but that was ancient history, and we've been treated very differently than everybody else has been treated now. But anyway, I wanted to make a comment because I wanted to add to some of what has been said so far. There are resources down in the valley, there are resources in Tucson and Flagstaff, but here, in addition to the work that Keep Prescott Together has been doing, Prescott Indivisible has an immigration team, and for the last particularly 2 years. At the beginning, we were dealing more with immigrant rights and giving people, whether they were documented or not, flyers about what their rights are and how, what they could and shouldn't do, et cetera, et cetera. But in the last 2.5 years, at least, we have been supporting the Daca renewal process. And this community, even though what Sergio said is absolutely correct, you just wonder sometimes about the support. On the other hand, there are many people here who are extremely generous and who care deeply. And so through fundraising, the Prescott Indivisible Latin immigration team has been able to provide funds for 37 DACA renewals in this town. And those are 495. Like they said, that's $495 every 2 years. And what Sergio did not add to is, not only do they have to do that, during that 2-year period and forever and ever, they have to have an impeccable record. So you don't just keep on qualifying and assume everything is going to be okay. If you were stopped by the police and did something slightly wrong, that may keep you from being renewed, even though the U.S. is the only place you've ever known. And the only other thing that I think Francine was saying, the Latino community here is united, but on the other hand, it's very it's not homogeneous. I mean, you have some people who have been here for a long time who don't want any more immigrants, and you have people who just came recently. So I think that the difficulty that you have found in terms of organizing is because sometimes we are not all together on the same page. Thank you very much.
I think that what's really interesting is that we had several meetings leading up into this, in that all of the comments that are happening right now, and particularly from Maria Elena, who was not a part of those conversations, but has tuned in to like what it was that we were talking about. There are a lot of Chicanos, Mexicanos here, a lot. The problem here, and I say this as a 9-year resident of Prescott and somebody who is an organizer by trade, right, is that it doesn't matter if we're documented or undocumented. We are completely invisible in this town, completely invisible, right? Legal status has nothing to do with it. We do not exist in Prescott, Arizona. And so, and I think that that's interesting because there are lots of places where you have very conservative, well, particularly Mexicanos, right? But they're still like proud that they're Mexican. They just don't want any other Mexicans to come here. It's very strange. My father is like this. And so it's a very strange conversation with him. So, I mean, the thing is that, I mean, part of the question is, how do we as a community raise the profile, right? And so when we think about the organizing that's being done over the last couple of years, certainly, I mean, all of that started before 2020. I mean, it was before the election. We were gearing up for the election cycle. But it's going to be very interesting the next several years, because I think that what Francine and Sergio both have alluded to is absolutely true. Nobody's going to be able to come from outside of here and I'm not talking about immigration or DACA. Nobody's going to be able to come from outside of here and organize or raise the level of this community. That has to happen by people who are living here, right? And so then but what that means is that that's a whole nother way of thinking about organizing and how it is that we're going to organize. And I think it's going to be a little bit slower, but I also think that process is underway. And so then the question, becomes, at least in my mind, is what role do you all play in terms of helping that to happen, right? Because we're not going to be able to do that here in Prescott without the help of white friends. It's not possible because people will be too scared to do it.
Can I ask you a question, Professor Mireles? I have a comment here and a question. It says, I'm so upset about our schools that our schools can't teach Hispanic history. It was so successful in Tucson for the Latino students. How do we change this?
So this is something that, we touched this topic of surrounding educational tools and resources that aren't available within our school districts here. So again, my own experience in the transition from high school to college was very difficult in the sense that I had to do everything on my own. And this is very similar to the experience of just any first generation college student, but particularly with people of color and undocumented community. But with that being said, a lot of our counselors and advisors aren't prepared and don't have the tools or guidance to help transition a college student that's undocumented into college. And that's the role of a counselor and advisor, is to help guide you, help fill out FAFSA, help fill out college applications, scholarships, all that stuff. But the thing is that being undocumented, we don't have any of that. We don't qualify for FAFSA. We don't qualify for many, many scholarships. We don't qualify for some colleges won't even be available or an option because of its tuition costs. And so we did have, I think, an education, what was it, educators scholarships. We did a scholarship or a educational conference where we brought together many of the school counselors. I went personally, invited many school counselors from Bradshaw, Prescott High School, to help show them how you're supposed to deal with people of color and students who don't have that same transition process as a U.S. citizen, because we don't, like I said, maybe we don't qualify for certain scholarships, but having a list of scholarships that we do qualify for, showing us how apply to college, how to apply for other scholarships, and just all these tools that they're supposed to give to us graduating. And they didn't have any of that. So we did this educators conference where we talked about that, the issue of them having, learning to be prepared to, and have those tools to help transition. But then I remember that 2 of the counselors from Bradshaw High School walked out halfway through the educators conference because they had other things to do, which I completely understood. But in my perspective, I thought that was very disrespectful. And I thought that was doing our school district very dirty, in lack of better words, because we do need counselors who are adequately equipped to deal with any type of student. And I'm not saying that every counselor will be, but the mentality and the open mind to be able to adjust to it and to learn. I can't, I understand you can't apply for FAFSA, so let me find other resources for you. In my situation, it was like, oh, sorry, look for scholarships and I'll help you fill out for them, rather than here are some scholarships that you can apply for, or let me sit down with you and help you fill out those scholarships. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, teaching different history, cultural history, different culture classes. And this is something that I didn't learn until going to Prescott College, is not being, what would be the word? Being okay with, for a long time, I was okay with learning what I was learning, up until I got to Prescott College, and we were challenged and we had critical discussions and different different types of history that I hadn't learned in high school, that I didn't come to learn until now about my own culture. And not just Mexican or Hispanic heritage, but any heritage really, and anything besides, white colonist history, which is, also important. But it's just adequately preparing counselors and advisors and teachers to be prepared or open-minded to working with these students and adjusting to these students, because everybody comes from different backgrounds, and you won't know all the answers to everything or to all the questions that your students are going to have. But the willingness to help and guide that is what I think is very important, which a lot of teachers are starting to, I think, to see the importance in it, and are starting to become more active within learning how to work with students of colors, learning how to work with students who are first-generation college students, low income, like all these other things. But yeah.
As I mentioned, I am employed under Yavapai College, the community college here, as a Latino ambassador. So my job is to help the enrollment and admissions process of Latino students or people who are not documented. So I just wanted to add that I really resonate with Francine, and it's like it comes down to answer the question is the willingness of the staff of how fluent they want to be and how much of a help they want to be to the Latino students. I am in charge of organizing a cultural awareness training for the professors and the staff there at the college. And one thing that I found surprising was that what my employer, who is of color as well, and it's just the two of us in this Hispanic initiative for the college, one thing I found is that basically what it came down on her shoulders is that from above, the presidents of the college, is that to make room for only 1 hour trainings and have a series of 3 to 6. And I feel like I don't feel that's enough to train for what is someone's lifestyle or, someone's whole cultural perspective in education. And I feel that I'm giving myself a little freedom to speak out against, I don't feel that that's enough. I feel that there should be more hours or, more space should be created for that willingness to really take on a student who comes from a completely different culture, and how to be fluid and how to be, truly of help to that student. And yeah, I think it truly comes down, I feel, to answer that question is how much, is the professor or the educator willing to learn? Thank you.
All right, we have a few more questions, and I'm just mindful of the time that we have, but I also want to ask our panelists from the Arizona Dream Act Coalition, so what are some of the challenges that you have in your work and some of the hopes that you have as well for the future? ¿Cuáles son algunos retos que tienen y algunas de las esperanzas que tienen para el futuro?
Uno de los retos y esperanzas en el futuro de Arizona Dream Act Coalition es empoderar y educar y poder tener una solución permanente, más que nada una solución de ciudadanía a los jóvenes, porque DACA no es una solución para ellos en cuestión educativa.
So one of the things that, one of our hopes that we have is as we continue to educate and empower the kids or the DACA participants is that we are looking for a definitive solution, because DACA is not the definitive solution. So we're looking forward to something that's permanent for our dreamers.
I also wanted to say as well, like DACA is not permanent, and as a DACA recipient myself, I want to see the education programs prosper. We need more scholarships. We need more tools for us that we don't have as much as we should, because we also want to continue our path in education, become better for our parents that came here, that brought us here.
Actualmente a nuestra directora de la organización, Karina Ruiz, precisamente la meta de ella es que haya una solución permanente para los jóvenes DACA. Precisamente por eso está en Washington ahora.
Their president is currently in Washington working for a permanent solution, permanent alternative to DACA. So let me go through a couple more questions, and these are kind of together. For Professor Mireles, what do you think the Latino population sat out the discussion on immigration? What will it take for the Latino community to get more involved? And also, and you've already mentioned, you've already spoke about this. How do you feel in terms of the community support for this cause?
There's a couple of things. One of the things I think that's a problem is the use of the word Latino, because we're not really talking about Latinos here. What we're really talking about are Mexicans, and I know that sounds, to some people that sounds chauvinistic, but it's actually, like, if you look at the numbers, like of those 62 million people, like 2/3 of them are Mexican, right? Like, this is Calhoun's worst nightmare, okay? And the majority of them are legal. So I think that, when you start saying Latino, it obfuscates it a little bit. Not that the word doesn't have a place in the conversation or whatever. I use the word Latino all the time. But I think that part of the problem is that we need to be specific about what we're actually talking about here, because I think, like the sister said, Cubans who came to the United States were treated very differently. And in some ways, so were Puerto Ricans, right? Which is the next largest group. I mean, at least when Puerto Ricans came to the United States, they were already citizens. Granted, it was a colonized, it's a colonized and continues to be a colonized relationship, but they were still citizens, And so I think that, yeah, I mean, when you start looking at it like that, or even if you take a look at like when they say after the last election, they started talking about how Latinos were so conservative, right? And with respect, what they were really talking about are this huge Cuban coalition, right? That's based out of South Florida. And I mean, even if you look at the makeup of Congress, I mean, the Latino Congress people that are there and the senators, they are Cuban, right? And so there's a political difference that is significant, right? And so I think that, language, words are very important, right? Words matter. And so, and they matter, and it's how we make meaning with each other is through these words. And so I think that when we're talking about this specifically, we need to be very clear about that. I think, I don't know. I have really racked my brain about this last one. But I don't think it's because people don't care that they haven't gotten involved. What I think it is that there is a profound lack of organization, particularly on the national level, in the Chicano-Mexicano community. It's profound. As a matter of fact, probably the most organized piece or a segment of our community is the immigration movement. After that, it's like, what? I mean, we look back into recent history and we see that there were, huge movements in the 60s and the 70s that were national, and, there was all this stuff happening. I think that it also speaks to a lack of understanding about history and about recent history, and not just, 400 years ago, 500 years ago. I'm talking about recent history. And that's important. And what I have found is in classes is that my, especially Chicano Mexicano students, they really don't know their history. I mean, they don't know it at all. It's shocking. It's a little sad. And what I find really interesting, lots of times, is that the ones who come here from Mexico, they don't actually know anything about Mexican history, and they don't know anything about Chicano history. So really all they know is white settler history. That's it, you know. And so I think that that's not an uncommon situation, and I think that that's also impacted it. But to think about how it is that we organize on a national level, right? I mean, that's really the question that's consumed me over the last 5 years. I mean, most of my life I spent organizing in local communities. And, you know, I'm very proud of the work that I did, and I think that we did good work. But it's not enough. There has to be a national vehicle. So, you know, like for the last year and a half, I've been organizing with a group of people from around the country who are trying to restart the Raza Unida Party, right? And we've made tremendous headway in terms of like, you know, we have chapters springing up in 8 different states around the country. I think that that's what's going to make, I don't know if that's what's going to make the difference, but it's that shift in mentality. Because I'll tell you, and I don't know how much you all have experienced this, but in the last 10 years, there has been this like weird focus on the community, right? Like it's all about the community, which I think is really interesting because nobody ever really defines what the community is, but what they do say to you is, if you're not from here, you can't be a part of this conversation, right? Well, I mean, that's not really a way to scale up a movement. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's not really going to work. And there's also a lot of discussion around authenticity, right? Like, I think I'm the only person up here, maybe, who is not a DACA recipient right now. That's what it looks like, right? But there would be people who would say, you shouldn't be on that DS with them because you don't know that experience. You don't have anything to add. You can't talk about it, right? I'm not making that up. I have heard people say that. I've had students say this in my class, right? Which to me is shocking, you know, that you would tell somebody who actually wants to help you that they should just shut up and sit back, okay? I mean, as an organizer, as a person who's worked as a professional organizer for 30 years, I mean, I can tell you that that is not how you build coalitions, you know? And so, but, I mean, that's language that gets thrown around a lot, you know? And I think that, I mean, there's so many things that are happening at one time, and I think that that's it. But I think mostly it's the profound lack of organization within the Mexican-American community. That's mostly what I think it is.
Yeah, I would like to also add to that question just a little bit. As I mentioned, I wanted to bring up the topic of art, which is important to me as an artist. You know, culture is really rooted within land, and as you know, and the history of that land. And I believe that a byproduct of culture is art. You know, I feel that as an artist myself, I really fall behind with I really follow the Afrofuturism movement, for example, which is, you know, the allowing of an artist to really advance the culture, you know, through the means of art. And I believe that art is based off of tradition, what has been there before, the history, the land, but also, you know, having the freedom to advance your own culture in your own expression as a Mexican now, for me, for example. And I believe that one thing that would really support the community and to really get out of the shadows is Whiskey Row, for example. It is full of art galleries, and I don't see one single piece of Mexican art. And I feel that if one way to support and build momentum here in Prescott now is to really make room for Mexican art. And I feel that, you know, there's no like, you know, people aren't like planning or conspiring to like suppress Mexican art. I just feel like there's no organization to make room for the art. And I feel that that is one simple step. You know, words, like that's one way that we organize, what Todd said. We make meanings out of words, but it's, you know, we also have a culture that is very much driven with images. And I feel that if we start with that, you know, if we make room for for the expression of Mexican art, that is one way to really create representation. And if there's Mexican art up in Whiskey Row, you know, that's something that I would find really inspirational, and I would feel like there would be that representation, and I would be very excited when that day comes, you know. But I feel that that is one way to support and get people out of the shadows here in town.
This is something that's really valuable for our churches, but for our communities. And it's important for us to open spaces for these conversations and for us to listen and be present. So once again, I just want to thank you, and I want everybody to just kind of give them a hand for their time.